What is up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 13.7, I guess is technically going to be locked in 12 hours or so, but work on 13.7 is essentially done. The directions are all locked. So I'm going to talk about the stuff that I implemented into 13.7. Much of these changes are already posted on Twitter or Reddit. They're already going to be live on the PBE, so not a lot of surprises here, but if you don't keep track of everything, then I'm here to tell you about what I worked on directly in this patch. Some of the why, we're not going to do a ton of math, it's going to be a bit more the hows and whys. I want to try to differentiate this a bit more from patch rundowns that I do every single patch. So 13.7 is basically the first of two, the primary, I guess I should say, esports-focused patches leading into MSI. We still do buffs and nerfs throughout the year based on pro presence. This is why Ashe support got nerfed. This is why Caitlyn as an AD carry got nerfed. This is why largely Azir got a lot of changes throughout this year. Then we're almost done, I think, with 13.7. So there's, some looking at pro play throughout the year, but 13.7 is largely really pro focused, and we try to swing on things where it's like, well, okay, the win rate is still actually relatively high in solo queues, so it's pretty safe to move. And anyway, yeah, it's a pro focused patch. There are some follow up to Azir changes that I had pushed through in 13.3, 4, 5. And anyway, let's get into what's actually going on in the patch, and we can give individual context as it happens. So up first is, in fact, Azir. So we're just going to stay at this blank screen for a while, and I'm going to give you a quick history on what's happened with Azir so far this year. So heading into patch 13.4, with Ryze and Kassadin getting nerfed, Azir was the number 3 mid laner in pro play, and I made the bold prediction that if we didn't nerf Azir, he was going to be 100% pick ban in pro play. He often tends to be, and so in 13.4, I shipped a set of changes that I expected to be win rate down in pro play. This was a substantial drop in level 1 mana. There might have been some Q damage changes, I don't remember exactly, but there was a damage increase to E, which you max last, and a damage increase to R, primarily at later ranks. This tended to actually give him around 1% win rate in solo queue, and though his pro presence initially dipped because pro players were like, whoa, we lost 100 mana, wow, we can't land on him, that presence kind of went right back up by the end of 13.4. Now there's a weird bit of conflating data there with 13.4, which is this was the patch after Annie and Aurelion Sol came out. So when 13.3 hit, you have an overpowered mid laner and an overpowered mid laner who both launch at the same time, and that's going to depress the win rates of every other mid laner in the game. And so some of his win rate growth from 13.3 to 13.4 was actually fake because it was Annie and Azir getting nerfed in 13.4. So there's a bit of weird stuff going on in that data, and so it's a little bit tough to actually compare pre-patch to post-patch. You actually should probably go back to 13.2. If you go to 13.1, it's start of season. That's going to have its own weird biases where players aren't going to be quite matched appropriately, and if Azir players tend to be higher elo on average, they're going to tend to climb more on average. They're going to tend to increase the win rate. Like, a lot of weird stuff happens, and so there aren't a lot of really clean places to draw information from, but you can look at historic win rate and whatnot. Anyway, this is to say that 13.4 had changes that actually increased Azir's win rate. The thought was that maybe it would lower his pro presence, and to be fair, it actually did, but keep in mind that whenever we're developing, we're going to be always about 2 patches behind pro play. So by the time pros are playing on 13.4, we've functionally locked 13.6. That's about the area that we're in, and that makes it pretty tough. For example, 13.7 has been locked right about now. 13.6 has been on live for a little bit, and that means roughly tomorrow, pros will start playing on 13.6, and so we can react to that across 13.8. But we're going to react to only so much information of what's going on there, right? So you can see how it can get a little bit funky, that we're basically always 2 patches behind. We cannot react to pro on 13.6 and 13.7 because 13.7 is already locked. So anyway, even though we shipped 13.4 changes, by the time we locked on 13.5, we just got the first few glimpses of pro play. And this was, again, them being overly gun shy. Azir was actually still pretty good in pro play. But again, those were changes that did raise his win rate. So 13.5 had a really big overhaul of changes. This was taking more the entire patch to come together with some bigger sets of changes. This was Azir's turret. scales differently. Instead of with game time, it scales with character level. The AP ratio nearly tripled. The armor and MR scales off his character level instead of based off of game time. This is basically, some of it was rescripting work so that it would be easier for designers to tune in the future, because it's all there in Azir passive.json, and he's like, well, here's the armor value, here's the MR value, here's how much armor and MR it loses when you go away, here's how much damage it's going to have. It makes it a lot easier to track all that and a lot easier to update in the future. Duration, all that kind of stuff actually set in a file, not in the script itself, which is a much scarier thing to touch or to micropatch or to even wade into to know where you're even looking for to make these updates happen. A non-insignificant portion of my job is figuring out how to even change the thing you're changing, because it's fairly frequently not in the right place. Anyway, rescript on the passive, lowering his Q damage, increasing W damage, lowered his overall attack speed, a few different changes overall. But anyway, the sum result of 13.5 for Azir ended up being a substantial loss in win rate. Now, the loss in win rate was actually relatively low for the bottom half of players, moderate for sort of the top half of players, and then really extreme for the extremely elite players. This was like 4% win rate minus in Masters Plus, and like 1% win rate minus in Sub Gold. And it scaled pretty linearly at that point. I did several analyses at various points in time. This relatively remained true. One weird conflating factor with that, so the win rate, right, if you look at just generic Azir win rate, again, -1 to -4 based on elo. The interesting thing about that, though, is no matter what elo you looked at, you could gain about 2% win rate over generic baseline by playing W max. And you can gain more than 2% win rate by playing W max with an attack speed keystone like Lethal Tempo or Hail of Blades. Now, this is using statistics, which means it's measuring things that already happened, and you're trying to hope that you can peel out truth from history, if that kind of makes sense. So, for example, maybe only really good Azir players understand they should be maxing W. Maybe only really good Azir players understand they should be running Lethal Tempo and Halo Blades. And people who don't think for themselves tend to lose more than other players. People who don't think for themselves are going to have a lower win rate, as they still do Q max other things. Anyway, in 13.5, Azir appeared to be in a state where Zertgreaves might be outperforming Sork Shoes. Nashor's Tooth was very competitive with Shadow Flame as a second item, about 1% win rate delta, and it used to be 2.5% win rate delta. Nashor's was below, it got a lot closer. And again, attack speed Keystone seemed to do a whole lot better. The most obvious one was that Lethal Tempo was strictly better than Conqueror. If you wanted to play Airy or Comet to play as a poke style, that's a little bit orthogonal to Halo Blades, although Halo Blades is a pretty solid laning phase rune. The cooldown's quite short. It nearly ends up with Q's cooldown. It actually works pretty well. But regardless, I think there was a lot of player behavior difficulties because people aren't, I think, quite building Azir most correctly. Now, the other conflating variable here, at least one of the other conflating variables here, is that Azir seems to be a much better anti-melee champion than anti-ranged. With Q's cost going up, with Q's damage going down, Qmax Azir simply isn't very good, especially with his mana pool going down, and it was kind of the major way he could fight back against ranged champions, that when Syndra walks around at 1100 range trying to QE you have a 1200 range on Azir Q into auto attack, and so you could fight back, and it was a relatively playable lane. With his base health down to 550, with his mana pool very constrained, with his Q damage fairly low, Q auto doesn't keep up with Syndra anymore, but W max certainly still does pretty well against Yasuo and Zed. So there's some conflating factors here, right, where the matchup skew plays into playing W max. I think overall, Azir is likely going to be in a spot where his lanes are going to have some pretty significant matchup skew, where before I think he was generally speaking able to, if a melee champion dies me, I ultimate in my tower. If a range champion fights me, I WQ auto them. And he kind of had a tool for every situation, and this is why he had been such a safe, blind pickable, omnipresent pro play mid laner, because there weren't matchups that could actually hard counter Azir. His lane matchups were all pretty solid. He could burn through his mana pool to play for lane control, recall in Lost Chapter, and then his infinite control from there, while having great late game. And Azir has been historically one of the most dominant mid laners in pro play history. Because he kind of has it all if you know how to play the champion appropriately, which is namely just spamming Q at all points in time and winning every poke trade. I'm slightly overstating, but it's not by that much. So anyway, the current state of Azir in 13.5 is one where W, now that it gives you 10 flat damage per rank up, now that Q's rank up is pretty penalizing mana cost wise, W max tends to overperform compared to Q max. However, only about 1/4 to 1/5 of players are maxing W. Now you consider how often Yasuo and Zed and Yone and Katarina and Talon are actually in mid lanes in solo queue, and you realize that players are still not maxing W, even matchups where they definitely should be. And so we have a pretty significant problem if players aren't actually using the skill orders appropriately, even when they are correct, even if they are biased towards melee matchups. This all circles back to 13.7, where we did a lot of data collection to figure out how much win rate we really think Azir has room to move. TLDR, about 3%. The expectation is that the W max build should go up about 3% win rate and should be pretty fair, assuming we're not running into huge pro skew issues. And theoretically, Azir's win rate on the patch will go up 5% if we can get players to switch over to WMAX. So if people, essentially if players cooperate, there is a chance Azir is plus 5% win rate this patch, if you just compare generic win rate to generic win rate. The goal, though, again, is for players who are putting points in W level 4 and 5, maxing W overall. This should be about 3 percentage points of win rate, and hopefully this win rate is further low MMR skewed, so that Azir can maybe get to the point where he has 50% win rate and not overtaking pro, which is a situation that I don't think he has maybe ever been in. So that would be really, really cool if we can make that happen. This is basically the goal of the changes, was to try to heavily unpro skew Azir. One extra thought to bring up here is the idea of WMAX actually was a happy accident. When I stripped a lot of free attack speed off of W and moved it into his attack speed ratio and a little bit of his attack speed growth as a character, in order to try to make Berserker's Greaves and Nashor's Tooth less bad than replacement, this ended up shifting damage into ranking W, which ended up actually making WMAX a very, very strong thing. Certainly I was trying to nerf what early Qs could do, but it turns out that WMAX as a champion is probably a much healthier champ to balance for pro versus solo queue, because he will probably have a much more kind of stratified sets of matchups, which is probably going to be a positive, because in pro play you can just counterpick the guy with Syndra and he has to deal with it, which makes him not a very safe blind, and it makes him very good when you're going to be blind picking Zed all the time. Okay, Silas was the real answer here. Anyway, and Akali. So this circles back to actually shipping buffs for Azir to the tune of about 3% to WMAX, and trying to incentivize players to actually do that themselves. So up first are very, very simple changes to his base stats. Yes, at the bottom of the screen. Gonna have to deal with it this way so far. Sorry, you could zoom in or pause, or it doesn't matter. I mean, there's only so many visuals, right? So 3 base armor. Usually you can ballpark to about 1% win rate. This will, of course, depend very heavily on matchups. Obviously, this matters a lot more against Yasuo than it does against Orianna or LeBlanc. One thing about base armor that is interesting is that I believe it is a relatively flat stat comparing solo queue to pro play. So, and you know, challenger elo in the middle there for solo queue. So high elo solo queue tends to very closely mimic pro play. If you look at support pick rates and mid lane pick rates, kind of across the board, high MMR solo queue looks a lot more like pro play than low MMR does, where, you know, Yasuo and Zed and Katarina are still common champions in high MMR, but you see Victor go from like number 10 to number 3, and Yasuo goes from, you know, number 1 to number 6. Like, that is the kind of thing that tends to happen when you shift things around, when you compare like bronze or gold to Diamond, Masters, Challenger, because pro play has a bunch of LeBlancs and Victors and Azirs out there, except for today, and so high MMR tends to kind of follow that as well, because they follow the trends most closely, right? It makes total sense. So anyway, so it means, by the way, that there is usually a lot more physical damage in the mid lane in lower MMR. However, early game, and base armor tends to be a little bit more early game skewed. It's 3 armor at level 1, matters more than 3 armor at level 18, right? It's obvious. Either way, high MMR players actually auto-attack each other as range champions. A very like core LeBlanc trading pattern is level 1, auto W, auto, then W backwards, and if you did it better than them, you got 3 hits, they didn't get 3 hits, you got electrocute, they didn't, congratulations, you won your trade. This is relatively common. You get level 2 first, great, WQ auto or QW auto if you're in range for that. Pretty powerful stuff, of course, getting electrocute and trading back. And just in general, people are really good at auto-attacking each other in high MMR. So it's a bit of a wash, but either way, with Azir's base health going so incredibly low, 550 is as low as you can get without being Senna, who has a self-heal in 600 range, and Yumi, who is untargetable, and Anivia, who self-revives. this is the bottom of the barrel. I certainly swung really hard base stat wise in the 13.5 changes. I have no regrets here. Azir is certainly a very high scaling mage. His health growth is incredibly high for a mid laner, for a mage overall. His armor growth got buffed in that patch. I specifically tried to push him toward more late game stats. This is what helped kind of salvage his low MMR win rate, because he lost a lot of power, but he gained stats that, you know, would affect him more in high MMR, or in low MMR, I should say. Base health is relatively flat, but look, having 19 armor and 550 HP is really, 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 really low, so giving him something back. And again, armor is, you know, equal to maybe a little bit low MMR skew because of how many Yasuos and Zeds and Talons are down there. The next thing is a simple attack speed growth gain. Again, we'll do the math in the patch runs on itself, but this is basically simply keeping up with his attacks per second from before the 13.5 changes. I deleted a lot of attack speed from the kit. The 3 soldier passive, I'm putting 3 soldiers down, is indeed still gone. But this now basically keeps him at the same attacks per second. It's going to depend based on the character level, of course. Keep in mind that old Azir in 13.3, 13.4 was maxing Q, so W was a 1-pointer until level 8. And so between like levels 3 to 7, you actually have more attacks per second than pre-patch. And then, of course, at level 13, when you had finished maxing W and you got 55% attack speed out of the ability, well, congratulations. That was going to be more attack speed in 13.4 than it's going to be here in 13.7. But then you level on beyond that, and you eventually turn back to green, and it's going to be relatively equal at various points in time, and it's going to fluctuate, but it's going to be a relatively fast attacking champion outside of, again, that 3-soldier pop. However, keep in mind that across this, the base damage on W went up by an incredibly large amount, and especially so with W max, that the damage per rank, the damage is largely in the per rank ability of W itself. So overall, this means that Azir's auto attack DPS has basically never been higher. It is very consistent. The inconsistency is, can you keep the soldiers in range? Can they dodge away from you? Not, did you just press W on cooldown? Because of course you did, and now they're in range of you forever. So I'm, again, oversimplifying somewhat and whatnot, but Azir WDPS is very, very high. This is the big thing about this champion, more than saying, no, you're a dive bomber, no, you're about stream a shuffle. This is like, well, he has very, very high DPS. We can talk a bit more about that later. The next section here is in his passive. This is not meant to be much win rate. This is just meant to be some cleanup and making the champion feel better. So I had initially gotten this feedback when I first proposed the change list, and I chose to say that's nice, but I'm going to go this way anyway. When I halved the cooldown and halved the duration of the turret, will make it a little bit stronger in and of itself. Turns out that, yes, duration is a really big deal for making this turret feel like it stands on its own, and so increasing it halfway, back to 45 seconds. Right now, the passive still does indeed decay its own health based on the duration. So it, used to do 3.3% of its health every second. Now it does 2.5 or whatever percent of its health every second. It just does the math in the ability, whatever the number actually is. It just, divides time by every second by 1/45 of its max HP, and it just does that to itself. So pretty simple there, but ultimately, yeah, this thing actually having a bit more of a duration probably doesn't carry that much weight overall. It's not meant to be a lot of win rate. It's just meant to feel a little bit better. I still don't think it should last for a full minute. That still seems a bit long in my opinion. But 45 seconds should be a pretty solid middle ground of, yeah, it survives for a while. This is, reasonably useful. It'll hold you a wave, and that's good enough. I think the whole 1 minute long just felt a little long to my taste, and I think it's actually reasonable to not have it be 60 seconds on its own. The other one is the cast range of actually summoning the turret itself. This is basically me handpicking a number that lines up with roughly his attack range onto a would-be turret. Keep in mind, Azir has 525 attack range. If you were to attack something, it would be towards the edge of the rubble, the edge of the turret. And so 525 attack range is going to be roughly equal to a 700 cast range, where he's functionally casting this by attempting to attack a minion that is on top of the turret. That is the functional coding of how this ability works. Took some time to figure out where this all was, how it was handled, where everything is done. There is a way to have him start and immediately stop the channel by changing some other cast range to be incorrect. There's actually 2 different numbers you have to change here. One just has to be big enough that he's not unable to cast a spell, and the other is what is his sort of functional attack range against this thing, and figured it out. But essentially now this means that if he could attack the would-be turret, he can summon a turret at that same distance. So this should be just a decent feels good change. Changing things like summon duration, or not summon duration, but how long it takes to summon, all those kind of channel things. That is a much more involved process. You have to go through the art team okaying things. Should this animate faster, right? There's more going on than is simply like, yeah, he can walk 200 units farther away before summoning, right? Like, it's a much more involved change and not one that I think is that important to put through. So it's a very quality of life focused thing. There was technically power here, but not much, and it should just feel better. It should feel like you're able to do this without it being sort of difficult to do. And again, I think matching its attack range is more than reasonable. It also roughly matches what his W range would be, because W range is basically his attack range. So again, really, really small. This is just feels good stuff, not meant to be a lot of power. So then we move on to basically two sets of changes that are combined, which is a whole lot going on to Q and W. So initially, this section was going to be a bit different when I was first planning out this patch, and then in talks with other designers at the company who gave me very good feedback, went for a different direction. So initially what this was going to be was simply lowering the mana cost of Q from 65-85 to just simply a flat 70, and basically nothing changing with W. The reason was to say, well, okay, WMAX appears to be about 2% win rate above QMax. I would like to preserve WMAX as the better build, but hey, we can make it less of a trap to max Q by softening some of the rank ups, and, that's probably reasonable. And the feedback I got was, well, why not just really signal to players that you want them to max W? If that's the healthier play style, just enforce that play style and go about it. And so that is why the Q mana cost is going up by another 5 to 25. It's why the W cost is actually going down with rank by 0 to 20. And it's why even more of the damage is going from the per level scaling of the champion, which is this right here, is going into the rank up of W itself. Yes, these numbers are funky. As it stands, this initially was 50 to 110 with no per level scaling until level 10 or so, and this made it roughly tread water against pre-patch. If W didn't give you any champion level scaling until around level 10, 11, or 12, and this became 50 to 110, you would have the same champion as before the patch. The reason this is changing at all is because I got basically a final evaluation from the gameplay analysis team, which is a bunch of incredibly highly skilled players. One of them is an ex-LCS mid laner. Like, these are really, really good players. And they're like, hey, you said your goals were to give 3% win rate to WMAX Azir, and your goals were to eventually incentivize WMAX. We don't think base armor plus attack speed growth plus like little minor stuff to the passive, including this small nerf to Q, we'll get to it in a second. It's a very minor thing, but we'll talk about it a little later. We don't think it's going to be 3% win rate. We think you should add about 10 more total damage to W by around level 9. I said, okay, well, we can do that. So option 1 was to give back like 1 damage per character level scaling, so that this would still be 50 to 110, and he would gain like 0 to 8 by level 9, and then eventually get the extra 10, and then just do the same scalings before. But ultimately, because we're still saying, well, no, we're trying to incentivize WMAX as much as possible, I took that damage, that 0 to 8, from levels 1 through 9 by giving him a +1 per level character scaling and saying, no, we're going to put that 0 through 8 into the W. Now, the thing is, the reason I don't want to go for something much larger than this is because I really, really don't want to buff the early mid game of Azir. I want to make sure his late game is great. I want to make sure he gets paid off for having a pretty frail and difficult to play early game, especially against ranged champions. But like, I don't really want this to be 50 to 120. I don't want it to be 50 to 130. Though that would certainly be clean numbers, and we could find ways to do that. It is a lot of power to get an extra 5 damage or 3 damage, whatever, per rank when you come in at level 3, 5, 7, 9, and there's only so much I feel like it's reasonable. So yes, we have unclean numbers here. Yes, we're scaling by 17 per rank. Here's the thing. It doesn't really matter because there's a couple things going on here. So one, people don't read tooltips very much. Like, yes, you can go and hover it when you're about to level up your W, and you say, okay, if I get a rank in W, my damage goes from 50 to 67. And you're like, that's a weird number, and you don't think about it anymore, and you move on with your life. When you look at the tooltip of how much damage my W deal, it just says, arise, summon a turret that does, or a soldier that does 73 magic damage. And if you hold shift, you can be like, that's 67 from the W rank, and 0 from character scaling, and 8 from my ability power ratio of 0.55. Okay, and then you never think about it again ever in your life, right? Like, it's hidden behind hovering your mouse over the level up tooltip and reading the little inscription down there, or holding shift and reading how your ability actually scales. There is a reason why this is not 100 120. There's a reason it's not 130. There's a reason it's not 110. These are intentional numbers. This is what I consider to be relatively safe, but giving him 8 more damage on his W by level 9, and then giving him the rest as time goes on. He still gets more than half of his damage by ranking W, as you can kind of see here from what Arise is going on. But either way, again, this was basically to give him about 1% more win rate, roughly, which was basically the feedback given by the analysis team. And look, if we're wrong, if this list ends up being 5% win rate to W max, there's going to be some changes, right? There's going to be some nerfs coming in, because I don't think this champ can sustain plus 5% win rate to his strongest build. I think that is probably too much. That is a 52% win rate build, and that is almost certainly far too much win rate. Let's move forward, though, to the next thing that we can talk about, which is the compensation, right? So to further signal that you should max W, the mana cost goes down 5 with rank. The mana cost of Q goes up an extra 5 with rank. I also figured out, finally today, I got help from another designer at the company, to figure out how to override skill recommenders and say, no, as a designer, I'm going to put in that you should learn W at 1, Q at 2, E at 3, W at 4 and 5, and when all else is in doubt, max R, then W, then Q. Forget what the data says. And at some point, I can peel that back out when the data, lines up with maxing W. Usually, it's just data driven in terms of what is popular, because good enough. But there is an override coming into 13.7 where it's like, no, you will get a little flashing light that says put your point in a W. And so more people should be doing that. Uptick on W max has been very, very slow. Last we looked, in low elo, it was like 20% of Azirs were maxing W. In like Diamond Plus, it's only 25%. Even among one-trick Azirs or Challenger Azirs, it's still around 50% or less. I refuse to believe a build that is generically 2% win rate higher should at most only be 50% pick rate. So we're going to incentivize towards it. We'll see what happens. I mean, there will be some changes. Again, we talked earlier about the biases in terms of if you're more of a critical thinker and you identify what you want to max out, you're likely to be a stronger player. There's some stuff going on there, but certainly with these changes, we're really, 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 really pushing W max, which again, we believe to be a much healthier and easier to balance version of the champion. So one thing that's standing out on its own is a stab range change. So right now, if you play Azir on live, it is possible for you to cast Q. The Q hits your opponent. You then right-click them, and Azir starts walking forward to get into auto attack range, because his Q can stab his target while not being in his W auto attack range. I tested pretty thoroughly locally. I believe this is the exact right number where his Q stab can hit and his W stab can hit. I could not find one where the Q wouldn't deal damage but I could auto attack, and I couldn't find one with this number where I dealt Q damage and then had to walk up to auto attack with my basic attack instead of using my soldier. So this should line up appropriately in terms of what's actually going on here. Just FYI, that's the number as far as I can tell. This still, by the way, gives him more range on his Q than either Gragas or Orianna, were the two that I just blankly spot checked as long range Q hit the edge of a model skill shots of other mid laners. Orianna ball goes around 800-ish units and has about 150 unit radius. So then that can hit the edge of an enemy champion. Gragas something around closer to about 1,000 range. I forget the exact numbers anymore. Gragas, I didn't look at that closely. I just remember testing and writing down numbers and comparing it. And basically, Azir has among the best in class actual poke range, even with this change. Yeah, it's down 45. It's not a huge difference, of course, but this brings him a little bit closer to other champions. But Azir has, for a very, very long time, had incredibly long reach with his ability. This just makes it match the W and brings it closer to other pokeable mid laners. This is a very minor change, but again, one that I stand behind, as again, you don't get the weird instance of casting Q and then not being able to auto attack afterwards, which I think is just kind of weird. So that is basically the sum total of changes to Azir. A lot of changes that are simply about pushing players into doing W max. I am not married to this change. I'm not married to these unclean numbers. I think I always want to make sure W is 2 to 3, maybe even 4% win rate above Q. I'm not absurdly against Q max being possibly viable. But that was how we got into this mess in the first place. That if you can say, oh, well, actually, I can just max Q and hold on to Syndra matchup, we're back to being a pro problem, probably. And so in the short term, it's very much as being nope, we're going to incentivize W max, we're going to keep that one going. But if we get enough player behavior change and the win rate delta is really, really huge, I don't mind Conquering Sands going back down to this without, losing our behavior changes, right? Either way, though, keep in mind that this is going to cost 5 more mana until level 8, and by level 8, this is already costing 15 less mana. So in general, and this is with replaytesting feedback as well, Azir is no more mana constrained than pre-patch in WMAX builds. His actual damage output is strictly higher compared to max builds. In fact, it is plus 10 damage on the W from level 11 onwards. Like, this is strictly a buff through all of this, through this, through this, through this. This is the only nerf in the change list, and it's a very, very small one. So this is a lot of power to Azir. We'll see what it looks like in the patch, but yes, this is my 30-minute spiel for like the 4th time on Azir changes, and this is what we're shipping into 13.7. So now we get to much easier and simpler ones. I am, or I guess we are really, to be fair, shipping a change to Kalista. So I had been championing for a Kalista buff for the last several patches. Now that we're doing a pro-focus patch, we decided to go for it. So Kalista's had a very, very low win rate in solo queue for a very long time. It has been incredibly high elo skewed. I think she's around, this is from memory, like 46% win rate for the bottom half of players and just 50% for Masters Plus. And she's certainly been in pro play before. She's actually sitting at like a solid 8 to 10% presence year long. Some of it's been support, okay, sure, but like she's actually been around a little bit. Anyway, I think there is room to give Kalista a little bit of power, to give a little bit more so that players can think about it, and to give her a buff that is low MMR skewed. So growth stats tend to be low MMR skewed. Weird stuff with Kalista is attack damage is weirdly more and less effective than you might think. So Kalista still has a passive where her auto attacks deal 90% of her total AD on hit. That is still there. That still exists. This was done a long time ago to make her less of a BF sword power spike kill you champion. Of course, now her builds are much more on hit, but she still does go shield bow. Right, she still does get plus 30 AD on her first buy. And this was to lower her first item power spike so that she basically scaled less well with gold, because she just kept taking over games in pro play by spiking one item and just instantly killing you. So, okay, she gets 10% less of what this buff is based on her auto attacks. Other side of it, though, is both Q and E are total AD ratios. And I'm actually very glad that they are total AD ratios, because it means that they will scale on their own at level 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I don't know why I went to 20. It stops at 18. Let's move on. But it also means that this base attack damage growth increases her Q and E damage as time goes on. Now, it increases them, again, more later than early, but it also means that this does affect her spell ranks as well. Just her spells in general are going to do more damage. So this is, right, less important because of the auto attack thing, but also more important because it affects her 2 main damaging spells. Either way, I think this is going to be a relatively small buff. We are aiming for under 1% win rate. We are aiming for low elo skewed, and it would be cool if Kalista showed up in pro play a little bit. I don't think this buff is so big that she should take over pro. And to be clear, if Kalista becomes 100% pick ban in pro play after 3 months of getting relatively none for 0.25 AD growth, you can all join me in saying that pros know what the hell they're doing, because there is no way this champ should go from 2% to 100% presence because of 0.25 AD per level, right? Like, we all know this, so you can just collectively join me. If we see 80% presence Kalista, pros are universally trolling around the world, right? Okay, let's move on. This one took me quite a while to get to. This was a suggestion from one of the other designers as a, hey, while we're here, a feels good buff, which is lock up either her or her teammate or both of them for less time than currently on live. This took a while to figure out how to do, because there are like 8 roughly scripts for her passive. This is not necessarily bad coding. It makes sense because of what goes on here. So let me walk you through the workflow for how the Oathsworn thing happens. Okay, so Black Spear is a castable item, right? So it has an item. It has an item ID. She gets the item in her inventory when she spawns. It's in the shop for Kalista and for Silas. Technically, Silas' item is a little bit different. It is technically a different item, and it has a spell, right? So, okay, cool. I have an item. Congratulations. File number 1. There's an item. It has an icon, whatever. Okay. When she activates it, she casts a spell, right? And so she casts, like, Kalista Black Spear spell. I don't remember what it's actually called. It's not called that, but who cares? So it casts a spell. When she casts that spell, it sets a flag that says, hey, I just cast my spell, and it deletes the item from her inventory. It consumes the item functionally. Okay, great, congratulations, nothing too special here. All right, well, she of course has to cast it at someone to cast it, right? It's a targetable spell. I target Amumu, or I target Rel. Okay, so far we're on the same boat, no problems here. This is all very logical, this all makes total sense. Of course it does, cool. Okay, well, I cast the spell onto Rel. Okay, so then what happens is, and the spell is like really involved. It has a very long cast time of around 2.25 seconds, where she rips the spear out of her chest and then pulls it out, then throws it. Has a very long cast time. Okay, wonderful. And then it hits the ground. Okay. It then applies, I believe. Oh no. Okay, so then it replaces technically. It gives a new spell to your target. It says, okay, whoever your target, slot 0 becomes like Kalista passive execute or passive invoke or something like that. So they get a spell. And then it tells, okay, give them the spell and then make them cast that spell slot, right? Cast spell slot 0. Okay, sure. Okay, cool. So now we're casting a new spell. Now Rel or Mumu is casting a spell. Well, the spell is targeting Kalista. Right, and it's okay. Well, Kalista, I'm going to cast 2 things on you. I'm gonna cast like Ceremony Spell 1, and that's going to like make you move, and it's gonna make you cast another spell called Channel. I'm gonna make you, Kalista, cast Channel on the Black Spear. I don't fully understand exactly how all of that works exactly. I was able to work through the workflow though. But now Rel is casting a spell on Kalista, and the spell on Kalista says, hey, I'm going to replace your Zeroth spell slot with this Channel on the Black Spear spell. And so you're now going to cast Kalista passive Channel, right? So you're gonna be told to move. You're gonna be told to change your spell slot, and you're gonna be told to cast the spell. And then you're going to cast this channeling spell. Okay, that channel does literally nothing. It is not hooked to shit. It exists for purely ceremony's sake. Okay, it does literally nothing. In fact, as Kalista on live, you can break the channel and walk away. Nothing changes if you do this as Kalista, by the way. But it's there. We'll get to that in a second. That's one of the things that's changing. Okay, well, congratulations. Again, you changed Rel's spell slot, and then she cast a spell on you. When she casts a spell, she also puts buffs on herself. I forget what the buff is called. I forget what it does. But basically, it puts a buff on, and if I recall correctly, this buff says, okay, wait 4 seconds, then play this other buff, which is the one that like makes me play the death animation and whatnot. Wait 6 seconds and play a different buff. Which is the like blue teal like light comes down and like sort of forces the revive on my character, and then wait 9 seconds. Not then. It's wait 4, wait 6, wait 9, and then just like do these things at 4, 6, and 9 seconds from when the spear hits the ground. Yeah, so it's kill me and play that thing, revive me and play that thing, and then play the visual connection tether between me and Kalista. These are all timed out. So you know, Kalista throws a spear, I get a new spell, I cast the spell on Kalista and myself, technically, it kind of does both things. I basically, when I throw the spear at you, not only do I replace your spell slot and do that, I also put a buff on you that roots you in place. As I'm casting it, like as I start casting the spell, I root you, I make you turn to me over the course of 1 second. Then you're going to stop there for the rest of the last 1 second of my black spear, throwing animation. And then you're going to get this, like, stay in place for 4 seconds, then kill yourself, then revive, then we're ready to go. And then play the particle, right? We're not done. We're still going, okay? So there's more. So as you know on live, as you might know, you cannot pick a new target after 3 minutes. Like if you start and you make a Mumu your bestie, and then a Mumu DCs, you're like, oh shoot, here Trundle, just Trundle be my guy, right? The part where the two of us root ourselves and play like the first half of the ceremony only happens the first 2 times you use Black Spear in a game. Like if you were to like throw it on a Mumu and then throw it on Trundle and then buy another Black Spear and throw it on like a Nivea won't get rooted. It only works twice. You can't just like sit there and root your team forever. Which I think is reasonable, right? Like that's actually a pretty solid workflow, so you can't troll your team quite as much. But it also makes testing this stuff really hard because I have to like go into the script, change if the count is not greater than 2, then go ahead and do the scripting. It's like, no, not greater than 2,000. Let's run this. Also, if the game time is 180 seconds, no, if the game time is 180,000 seconds, let's run this stuff. So I had to I never shipped those scripts, but like had to edit them all locally so I could like continue to do stuff on my side. I used Rammus and Thresh as my proxies and kept throwing spears at them until I could figure everything out. So anyway, as I said, so Kalista channeling the spear doesn't do anything technically, because as soon as she throws the spear, all logic's happening. As soon as the spear is thrown, in 4 seconds you will die, in 6 seconds you will revive, in 9 seconds you will draw this tether. Congratulations. And everything gets to move and we're all gonna be happy. So what's happening is the middle part is changing. So I play my 2 second long spear animation, I throw it. And the second hits the ground, instead of waiting 4 seconds, wait 0.1 second, then you die. And so basically everything there is shortened by 4 seconds. Well, technically 3.9 seconds. So it's not spirits to the ground, then we sit here looking at each other for 4 seconds. And then I leave, you revive, you come up, and you come join me. It's we look at the ground, you die, you revive, you come up, and we move. So if basically if you are the Rammus, if you are the Rel, if you are the whatever, you are rooted for 2 seconds as you slowly turn and say hello, die, up, leave. And so it's 4 seconds off for you. For Kalista, I'm changing the logic a little bit. So basically, instead of Kalista getting to ditch her target, right, by like throwing the spear, rooted for 4 seconds, then I'm out of there, enjoy dying, you'll come see me later, she is still told to cast the channel spell, and I made the channel uninterruptible. So for the 4 seconds where you are forced to die, then come back, Kalista is forced to channel on the Black Spirit itself, and I timed it out because the channel duration used to be 3.25 seconds. The channel duration is now 4.0 seconds and cannot be interrupted. So now Kalista throws the spear, she is forced to channel on the Black Spear, and she is channeling for the exact duration of you die, you come back up, and you're ready to move, and we walk into the sunset together. So this is a pretty substantial change, not in terms of power, but in terms of, hey, you're not locked in for nearly as long. Again, about 4 seconds are cut off of how long the target is locked in place. It's a different amount for how long Kalista is locked in place, but regardless, you all get to hang out together. You're all locked down for the same amount of time. You can all leave together for the same amount of time. And again, the ceremony is about 4 seconds shorter, which means it is potentially possible to get this done before base gates drop. Not quite, I think, but you don't lose nearly as much time if you do it this way. And it's overall a positive. Hope the story was enjoyable and entertaining around how this all worked out, but each of those sections do make sense in terms of like their different buffs, their different spells, they're tracking different ways, but did take a while to figure out how this is all done, and I learned something I thought was kind of cool. All right, let's move on to the next champion. It's a very long story for 0.25 AT growth. All right, anyway, next up is a very small change to Rammus. So Rammus is a very, very, very strong low elo stomper. He is definitely doing really, really, really well in the bottom half of games. Overall, the typical rule of thumb is if you scale into late game, you'll tend to do much better in low elo than high games. Just ultimately, your ability to perform at a level 16 team fight is much more valuable in Silver or Gold than it is in Challenger, because games just are often going to end much more quickly in higher MMRs as people are really good at closing out on early advantages. So nerfing level 16, 17, 18 Rammus is going to do much more in lower MMRs than high MMRs. This is a pretty simple one where, yep, defensive ball curl is just not quite as good per rank up. Now keep in mind that this is up to 20% less, well, not, okay, it's up to 10% less armor, right? Because it goes from 2x total armor to 1.8x total armor. So it's 10% less armor at level 18. This counts his base armor. This counts 35 flat armor he gets from just having the ability in the first place active, and this counts all the items he buys. So it's 10% less total armor, which means it's nearly 10% less total damage from ball curl. Keep in mind there's a flat 10 damage on the passive that then scales with 10% total armor. That becomes 15 and 15% total armor via the passive when ball curl is on. So it's not a full 10% damage drop. It's always less than that. But certainly a meaningful change in how much power is on this ability, but only again past rank 1. Now what's interesting is there's data to indicate that WMAX Rammus is viable in lower MMRs. And it actually seems to be potentially dominant. Now, we talked about this with Azir earlier, where people who think for themselves will tend to do better than people who don't, because they have the critical thinking capacities to see, this is actually a game where I do want to just stack up armor. They're actually 5 AD, so I'm just going to max W. I don't care how good my ganks are. I'm going to power farm because I'm going to have double my total armor, and I'm going to be really, really good at killing jungle camps, and I'm just going to be a high gold income late game carry by being invincible and having 500 damage on Thornmail per hit. Yep, I mean, I think it's actually reasonable. And yeah, it kind of is unfortunate to remove that as quite as viable of an option. But also, again, he needs to be nerfed. He's like 54% win rate for the bottom half of players. That is absurd. That is not acceptable. And so, yes, he has to go down. Pumping this about 1.5% win rate, you can go to like 53, which I think is okay, at least in the short term. But yeah, this guy unfortunately has to get nerfed. And so that's what's happening. And I think there's one more change, and that is Thresh here. I know initially in the patch this was labeled as an adjustment. I am not convinced he needs to get a recompense buff. He's not tripping any huge ban rate problems. His win rate is not absurd by any means. He doesn't need to be strictly nerfed, but also He also doesn't like need to keep his win rate where it is. Like he is about 50%, and I think it's reasonable to be like, actually, you can just kind of take this and we can move on. And this is basically because in the 13 point, was it 3? I think it was 13.3, maybe it was 13.4. Thresh got a better cooldown incentive on his Q, giving him a 9-second base Q cooldown instead of 11, which is a very big change, and I was very worried about it, but we shipped it, and it was really fun for a lot of players. This actually, I think, generated a lot of excitement. We get to see some Thresh and Pro Play. It's pretty cool, but it's obviously a fairly substantial nerf. So keep in mind, though, if this was a 9-second cooldown, it was really a 6-second cooldown, and the problem with that is if you didn't have any ability haste somehow, a 6-second cooldown means I land the hook, you are CC'd for 1.5 seconds, someone else lands pretty much any crowd control at all, I've got Flay, and then guess what? Hook's back. And if I have any haste at all because I go cooldown boots, if I have any haste at all because my mythic has, I think, 20 on it, like no matter what, guess what? That 3-second cooldown means your cooldown goes from, 9 to maybe 7 on its own, and that 7 becomes 4. And for the first 1.5 seconds, I've stunned you. For the next 2.5 seconds, there was a Dark Binding, or a Flame Chomper, or pick a champion who has any crowd control at all. Syndra, who cares? Oh, Q's back up, and it's chain CC. Ultimately, having a 6-second base cooldown stun is a little too short. So this definitely does hurt his best case, but if you're throwing out speculative hooks and not hitting them all, it's not going to affect you very much. If you're not landing a chain CC because they flash out of the way after the first hook, it's not going to change very much. This will affect you when you throw a Q and you hit a minion, you want to try again a little bit later. Yeah, it's going to be up 1 second later. This is by no means not a nerf. This is obviously powered down. We'll see how much it actually is. I don't think it'll be that huge of a nerf to Thresh, but if it's like, 3% win rate, we'll buff the champion back, right? Like, Thresh is a really cool champion. I like when he's in pro play. He does really fun things. I'm very happy with the work done to get him to do Qmax. We are in a boat now where Qmax is, I'm pretty sure it is definitely optimal. Now, to be fair, it is Qmax into Wmax is the ideal. Maxing Flay second is really not the play. Some of this is Threshers who know to think freely and put points in the Lantern are going to be more rewarded because they're probably just better Thresh players. But yeah, TLDR, Qmax and WMax Thresh is very, very strong. It has room to be nerfed. It's okay to just nerf him. I certainly wouldn't want a compensation buff here that actually raises his win rate. That would be really bad. I mean, not really bad, but like it wouldn't be the right choice. So it's a simple change here. It's a strict nerf, yes, but it's not a gigantic one. So that is it for my patch preview here. Obviously, almost the entire time here went for talking about Azir and walking through his historical movement and what the changes are here. But overall, hope it's going to be a good patch. We are heading into MSI in patch 13.8. So if any of our changes in 13.7 don't hit quite right, we can always retune. If, we're going to try to nerf Wukong by 1.2% win rate and the change list is 2.5. Oh, we can just cut half the changes back, and then we hit the nerf we think we hit. If the goal is to buff Graves by 1% and he gains 4, oh, okay, well, right, you can walk stuff back. So I'm glad that we're getting sort of a patch to react here, but we kind of hit the targets we wanted to. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hope you can have fun with the game. Thanks for watching. See ya. Bye-bye.